Hello, my name is Christine Thomas. I'm CEO of a charity called Building Self-Belief, which is based in the northeast of England. We work right across the northeast. We predominantly work in vulnerable areas with vulnerable students. And my lecture today is called Inclusion and How to Include Without Excluding. And I've had a good think about this, and what I'm doing is I qualified as an English teacher in '95, and I was an English teacher for many years in lots of different schools, and I was also a head of English. And I think when to put this into a context, I'm using that professional background of English teaching, and how we used to be taught how to include and differentiation, and how it's become kind of changed and to an extent, to me, distorted, and how we can maybe redress that through the use of artificial intelligence. So that's what I'm going to look at. There's going to be questions at the end as far as I'm concerned. So if you have a think about what I've said along the way, feel free to ask questions to me at the end. So it's going to be inclusion, how to include without excluding. So the definition, so I'm going to think about what is inclusion, or what we were taught or trained was inclusion. How do we achieve it without actively excluding other people? So I think there's kind of there's some kind of new thought where I think what's becoming difficult is if you change and adapt how you approach something to include some people, that you are actively excluding others. So how do you kind of get around that? And I'll give some examples later. And what we can do through artificial intelligence, because I think there's some amazing technology out there. We should be thinking about what we can do and how we can adapt for other learners or other people and accommodate needs, but not to the detriment of everyone else. So anyway, hopefully I won't offend anyone along the way, because it's quite a controversial topic. So inclusion, two definitions really: the action or state of including or being included within a group or a structure. And the example given dictionary wise is they're being selected for inclusion in the scheme. So that idea of being chosen and included because you are competent or because you're good at something. And then the other definition here is the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalised, such as those who have a physical or intellectual disabilities and members of other minority groups. And although I totally agree that we should really try as hard as possible to include everyone, I think where we're heading at the moment is the potential where we miss the point of what we're actually doing, because in including all needs, you're always going to be excluding someone. So how do we kind of use artificial intelligence to counteract that or to support that? And I think there's some, I think I haven't got all the answers by any means, but I think it's an interesting question and interesting debate for us to have. So the first one is being actively selected or included in something. And I think what is happening over time, and what I think is different to when we grew up, I suppose, is that this idea that if you want to do something, you should really strive to do it no matter what. Whereas we were always taught that, you have to really have a good think about whether you're actually capable or not. And I think there's probably a midway point there where you could, I look back and sometimes I've missed opportunities because probably was better than I thought I was. But then the other side to it is now, are we bending over? Are we going too far the other way to include people and by positive discrimination when really they're not necessarily capable of what they're being asked to do? And is that a good thing for them and for the companies and for the institutions involved? So sometimes to me, it is necessary to be selected because you've got the qualifications and the skills to do a particular job or a particular role. There are elements that can be adapted, but I think people have to learn to be realistic. And just because you want to do something doesn't mean you're always able to do it. And there's a limit to how many accommodations can be made. Honest professional guidance is essential, and there's a balance where employers need to be accommodating, but employees also have to be realistic about their capabilities. And the one that struck me most recently is one of my friends is a senior lecturer teaching PGCE English, so the postgrad in teaching certificate. And she said recently 75% of the students before they started the course has declared mental health issues. Um, and there's a couple of issues with that. One is it's a it's a tough gig teaching English at PGCE, and accommodating 75% of just mental health issues is a huge ask. And also, I mean, her query here was as well is, should you be on that course? Because although teaching English might sound like it's quite fluffy and lovely, it's actually a really tough job because the results of the school are all based on English and maths. So there's a lot of pressure on results. You quite often teach the same class every day for 5 days a week. So it's really intense. You've got to switch subjects. So, I mean, 1 minute you're teaching Macbeth to year 7, the next, an hour later, you're teaching Othello to year 12. You've got the pressure of, if you in 11 to 18 school, you've got the pressure of A level and GCSE results. You've got pressure of parents, you've got pressure of dynamics in the classroom. As a head of English, you've got the pressure of staff not turning up and how to manage that. So, and setting cover, and there's a million jobs you've got to do in an English department. And if you've got declaring mental health issues before you even start, maybe sometimes you need to take a step back and think, is that really the job for me? Is one example. It's a tough lesson, but it's the reality of it. So to me, people have to think about, before embarking on a particular career path or course, have a realistic think about whether it's the correct route for the individual. Um, and are you capable? It might be something you want to do, but is the reality totally different? And I think, this is what I was saying about the balance. I think, you want people, or you want young people in particular, to have a real understanding and a real aspiration to do as well as they possibly can. But do they maybe need to work on certain skills and work on their mental health in particular to get to a point where they could realistically achieve what they're embarking on? And I think in declaring before you do something, but the expectation then moves on to other people accommodating needs rather than the individual working on themselves. So again, maybe a bit controversial, but I do think it's something to think about because, as I've said, it's genuinely not the job. If you're struggling yourself emotionally, it's really tough because you've got to learn to put a professional front on at all times. It's really, really emotionally draining to have to do that. So I taught English for many years, and I think I was thinking about the examples of inflexibility, and the one for me where it really hit me personally was when I was really heavily pregnant. And when I saw the midwife, I mean, this was many years ago, there was like 10 steps that you had to take to ensure that you were as healthy as possible at the end of your third trimester. And when I looked at the suggestions, I could do 1 out of 10 in teaching. So, I mean, just examples being, having access to a toilet, 2 per member of staff, and it was right at the other end of the school. Sit down. You don't sit down in teaching. Very, very rarely can you sit all day. Put your feet up? Absolutely not. Can't put your feet. So I mean, so what I did in that situation, on balance, I thought I'd rather leave early than put myself at risk and just feel vulnerable all the time. So that's how I did it. And that's how I've kind of managed my own career the whole time, really, is that, and my personal life, to balance it out. I've kind of thought, is this for me? Adapt where I can and then pivot, which I think is a really interesting word, and think, do you know what? This isn't working anymore. What can I do instead? And I've done that right the way through my whole life, really, where I've kind of thought, I used to love this, don't really love it anymore. What else can I do? Make the decisions for myself. And it's quite empowering to do that, I think, as well. And I think this is what I'm going to move into about differentiation is accommodating everyone else's needs or some other people expecting you to accommodate their needs. Is that empowering? Because I genuinely don't think it is. So the next example for inclusion was the practice or policy providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalised such as those who have physical or intellectual disabilities and members of other minority groups. So there are, it's amazing now, all of the different gadgets and how AI has developed some brilliant resources, really. So for example, there's reader pens. So you could put a pen over a text and it will read it for you. So if you've got something like dyslexia or those kind of things, you can it kind of says it out loud for you. I taught a student who was blind, and she says that there's so many resources have been recorded now that you can, instead of relying on, I mean, she was actually partially sighted, so she'd have this huge magnifying glass, but now there's some amazing resources where you can, they're all recorded, so you can listen to them. These are podcasts, there's so much to listen to now that doesn't rely on reading. And then I've noticed a lot of podcasts now, I've got transcripts with them. So if you can't listen to them, you can read them. So I think artificial intelligence has done amazing things where even just things like, when you make a film like this and it will automatically produce the subtitles, although it has to be said with a Geordie accent, it's not very accurate sometimes. But the technology is there, and I think how amazing it is and how inclusive it is in comparison to how it was, and how we should be, to me, embracing all of this. And this is 100% a way where you can think through strategies of including people and getting them to do jobs that they previously couldn't do, or to do work that they previously couldn't do. And it's absolutely brilliant. Unfortunately, the reality is as always, cost. So there's all this brilliant stuff out there, but it's not cheap. So there's that side to it, and I'm going to go into later as well. The other issue, I think, is just how the whole education system's set up. I've got a couple of examples for differentiation. When I started teaching, we were taught, and I trained at the University of Nottingham in '95, and at the time it was kind of second best for education. It was a really brilliant course, so we were taught really, really well. And differentiation was taught to us as a means of teaching English, mainly actually to mixed ability groups. And the rationale was that everyone would work towards a similar task, but where key students would be identified as needing extra support, we would discreetly put some work in place to support them. So it wasn't this, I mean, the biggest example I could say is, like you've got a kid sitting with headphones on, and it kind of advertises really to everyone that there's some kind of issue there. So we were always taught to be as discreet as possible, not make any student feel inadequate in any way, but make sure they got the help they needed. And it is a real skill. And but that's the idea then, was always to make sure that you don't make people feel inadequate because they can't do something, but you also are skilled and trained to make sure that they get the help that they actually need. And we've got absolutely brilliant results with this technique. So the idea was to make everyone feel equal, not single anyone out, not make them feel inadequate in any way. And to ensure the success of this approach, we did have smaller classes, and we quite often would have additional support in the classroom as well. So as the main teacher, it was my job to develop the lessons, but I would have some kind of support there. And we did get some really, really brilliant results, especially with students with English as a second language. So I taught in London, and I remember a girl, Asma in particular, she's from Somalia. She came in at year 9 with absolutely no English, but left with 2 C's at GCSE in English. She did amazingly well. So embedded in an environment where everyone was speaking English and she could hear English, she picked it up really, really quickly. So those kind of things where you mix in all different abilities in, you mix in all kinds of educational issues there as well. And the outcomes, because they're hearing other things, they're hearing different ideas, and rather than isolating them according to need, they're feeling more like they're kind of part of everyday life, and it can have a huge bonus. So that's what we were taught. What happened was Ofsted decided they wanted to be able to see differentiation when they came in to do their inspections. So there was this massive shift where people not to me, not for the benefit of any student. So, but to make it look like they're differentiating. So it all changed, and to the detriment of everyone, as far as I'm concerned, and it distorted what differentiation was. Um, and I think I've got another example from teaching about digital learning and how it could be a bonus. So years ago, I also taught a student who had locked-in syndrome, and he had a brain injury at 7, and his mind was developed as it would have done, but he's physically he could kind of move, I think, one finger, and he got physio and things like that, and he was getting gradually better. But really, that was the reality. I was teaching him GCSE English, and at the time you had to do 20% speaking and listening. What he had was like the Stephen Hawkins, I don't know the proper word for it actually, but we called it a talker. So he could use his little finger to um, record what he was saying and then speak for him, which is amazing, amazing technology. So I rang the exam board and said, look, it's him doing the work, but he can't physically say it. He's relying on the talker, and no one had ever asked, which I thought was really depressing. So at some point, there's been some assumption that students with this level of need wouldn't be taking part. But if I was teaching it, to me, we'll have to include them. We'll have to do it. We'll have to like be able to get them every possible opportunity to pass. Anyway, they did accept it, but they had no policy for it. So to me, inclusion is finding ways of ensuring everyone is included. And then in extreme cases and things like that, it's up to big bodies like that to accommodate the needs and have a think about it. So there are definitely, and again, as technology's changing and improving, so do policy and approaches to education and approaches to work. And it's quite, and I think this is where artificial intelligence again can be an amazing thing. And how do we make sure that the workplace and the education and everything and the needs of the individuals can keep up with what's available to them and accommodate and include them as much as we possibly can, is the aim, I think. My other example here is for differentiation. The point of it was to empower. So for me, if you've got any kind of special needs, is instead of them feeling inadequate or feeling that they're not good enough, how do we empower them? How do we make them feel that they are as good as or sometimes better than other people? So again, English teacher head on here. So I recently did a questionnaire or a course, and as part of the grant submission, they wanted volunteers to complete questionnaires, and this was a government-run grant scheme, and basically it's so that they could have some data, so they could validate what we'd done, but also I suppose use the data to say how successful the scheme has been nationally, which is perfectly understandable. And if anyone here is in the charity sector, that's how it works. You've got to kind of have a theory of change. You've got to have evidence. You've got evidence of need, evidence of change, evidence of impact. I've got no issue with that. But I was in this meeting, and all the different charities were kind of saying, well, I've got people who can't speak English. They can't do this questionnaire. And I've got people with special needs and they won't be able to do it. And their expectation was that the government change the questionnaire to accommodate pretty much every need. And I think within the context of what they were being asked, this wasn't some major project. It was just a way of measuring volunteering. So to me, and what my feedback was that how we would teach to special needs and to people with English as a second language, we would say, right, have a try, get as far as you can, and then when you are stuck or when you feel that you've done everything you possibly can, then we'll intervene and then we'll support you, but have a try. So that's the empowerment, is having a go. And I think to assume need and assume that someone can't do it and that someone has to accommodate every single need in every language, it's just like ridiculous, really, to me. That as in this sector, in the charity sector, you're also there to support the people who use your service. And for this kind of thing, it would just take a couple of minutes. to actually talk them through it and explain it to them. And so again, that shift, rather than it being the central body to have to change everything. And I think the other depressing thing for me is this concept or thought that they can't do anything on their own at all, that they've got to have everything changed to suit. And there's an assumption of ability, that someone else is making a judgment about whether someone can do something or not. And that's never how we used to do it. It used to always be have a try, empower the person, say, do you know what? It might be a bit difficult, but it's worth having a go, and then we'll help you if you need it. And I think that's where we need to think about it. And again, going back to the argument about artificial intelligence, how can we use artificial intelligence to empower people and support them, not to kind of do it for them? Because, longer term, that's not a solution. It's not, doesn't really benefit anyone. And the people can do better, people can improve, people can change. And I think if you assume need that you're not accommodating that idea that they can change and that things can happen and things can improve. So I don't assume that someone can't do something before they've even started it. I just find that actually find it quite depressing. So you've got to empower and not disempower. And how do you, so empowering someone isn't assuming they can't do it. Empowering someone is having the confidence in them to be able to have a try and then intervene if they don't need to, and make them feel secure that they're not on their own as well. So that's that combination. So accommodating change is a massive thing for me. Special needs change. I've had kids that couldn't read at all, nothing, and they've got dyslexia, but then all of a sudden it just clicks in and something happens, something triggers in the brain and they can actually do it. You've got people whose movement improves. So again, if you were assuming an element of disability, you've got sight improvements, you've got hearing improvements. So that things, it all isn't just about deterioration. I think there's an assumption about special needs that it's about managing deterioration quite often, especially with children, that all of a sudden they can make huge leaps and bounds, and we need to accommodate the fact. So I think if your assumption is that certain people can't do anything at all, and I think that things like even with autism and this and people who are on the spectrum, that there's an assumption, I don't know, that some people don't like loud noises or some people don't like this and they can't manage this, but part of it's socialization as well, and getting to accommodate different changes and get used to different things and learning to deal and learning how they can manage these situations. I think if we just eradicate all what we assume are the issues, how is that going to make them progress? How is it going to help? So I think, again, the digital technology and artificial intelligence is absolutely brilliant tool to empower individuals. And we need to use the technology to develop and encourage people, not to eradicate problems or assume problems and eradicate problems, but equip people to have a confidence to manage their own needs. And I think that's the big shift there, that it's not for everyone else to make these decisions. It's to empower individuals to think, do you know what? I can do this. I can deal with this. I mean, one example I saw recently, someone had said they were at a neurodiverse conference and they personally found clapping or hearing clapping like gives them a headache, and asked the crowd to sign. So instead of clapping, to use sign language. And my initial thought for that is that what if someone's deaf and they're not accommodating their needs? So I think somewhere along the line, if you make those kind of vast changes and massive social changes, because clapping isn't just about applause, clapping is a social cue. Sometimes if someone's really struggling, starting to clap kind of gives them the confidence to like finish their sentence sometimes, or to cut them off, because there's all kinds of social cues involved in clapping, and I don't, it's not just about a reward. And some people really love getting that. It's just a really small thing, but especially little kids absolutely love having that idea of applause and being recognized. And I think that the idea of just eradicating that because one person is in the audience might get a headache is just bizarre. I find it absolutely bizarre that no, surely you've got to think about the bigger picture and about everyone and not just about your own needs. So I think this idea of that everyone's out there just to accommodate the individual is impossible to achieve. We need to think about accommodating as many people as we can, as comfortably as we can, but not excluding anyone at all. So anyway, there's one little example. Um, my other, and I'm going back to education here. My other bugbear about education is that how GCSE is taught. I'm not going to cover other subjects. I'm just going to cover English, but most subjects are 100% exam at the minute. So my middle son was the first year of 100% exam. He did 33 exams over 5 weeks. That's insane. What is that measuring? 33, because he was forced to do triple science. He had to do the baccalaureate because he was considered high ability. He did Spanish, so there's 4 exams just for Spanish. Honestly, it's like insane. So you'd have a physics exam in the morning, a geography on the afternoon, and you just have to switch, and there's a skill in it, but what are we actually, what are we measuring here? What educationally? And I think in a world, so English is 100% exam. The paper one is to look at then we'll talk about English language, a literature text, and cold. So they can't read it. There's no pre-release. They've got to read it in exam conditions, and but talk about it from a perspective of how language is used and how it's structured. So the extract, you're talking about authorial intent. The extract, the author didn't intend that to be an extract. So how it's structured is irrelevant to how the author intended it to be. So it's I genuinely, hand on heart, we're not really teaching them anything of any use here. And then writing a story in 40 minutes. Who would write a story in 40 minutes? We used to teach it as coursework where you redrafted it, you think about the skills, you learn how to write, you redraft it and you think about it, and then you produce a probably really decent piece of work. What can you actually do in 40 minutes off the top of your head based on one picture? I just don't see the value in that. The paper 2 is comparing a 19th century text, non-fiction, with a 20th, 21st century text. And like the question 2 is compare the differences and summarize, but you've got to use inference. And I just think, when would you ever do that in your life? And things like again, write a letter, section B, write a letter, write an article, things that the kids, they don't even read newspapers anymore for a start. They might read things online, but how online is about clickbait now. So it's a totally different strategy to how to encourage people to read your article. So we're not really teaching them anything of any use in the 21st century, as far as I'm concerned. And the biggest disaster is that the take up of English at A level, within a couple of years, there was a 78% drop in English language A level. And what we're seeing now is the English departments in universities closing because no one's doing it. So the kids who genuinely had a love of the subject have disappeared because the GCSE in itself is just doesn't inspire them in any way. And I don't actually blame them. If you go back to the issues with it, so it's become what is a coached exam, really. So if you spend a certain amount of time on a certain question and you move on, doing a certain amount, there's a skill in it, I suppose. But when do any of us handwrite in time conditions? Never, So all of the kids are handwriting in exam. We used to, even in 95, we would be working, actually, they're not that early. Maybe it's the turn of the 2000s. We were working on Word and the kids would redraft, learn Word. We would use, they were using computers, we're learning the different techniques. Now it's all handwritten, so they're not even using computers in English at all, nothing. We would look at newspapers, we'd look at comparing broadsheets and tabloids, we'd look at different styles of writing. I would do things like media campaigns, would do marketing campaigns, really, quite engaging things that are probably more relevant now than they ever were about how algorithms are used to persuade you to do so. Things that kids should really be learning just don't exist anymore in the English curriculum because the content is so full. And most kids, I'm telling you now, are doing Power and Comfort poems. There's 15 of them. Christmas Carol, maybe Jekyll and Hyde, Inspector Calls, and Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet, maybe something else. And so they're not that, when we did coursework, we had an element of choice where we would actually choose some different texts or choose some different poems. That's gone really. It's just really, it's content heavy, so there's loads in it, but it's really narrow as well. No American literature anymore. And I think in lots of ways, American literature had more in common with really for some of the kids compared to some of the English literature. But anyway, that's where we're at. The problem we've got as well, it's not just about English departments closing, is that there was this big thing about getting a C, and your two C's would get you onto your level 3 courses in childcare, in all kinds of things, and then you could move on. What's happening is, because it's 100% exam, so if you've got some even mild dyslexia and you're quite a slow reader, it's almost impossible to read those two sources and write in the time that you're given and do well. And it's not because you're not capable, because with probably, I mean, that some of them get an extra 25% time, but still not quite really enough to do well. And with some time they could do it, but without that time, so they're not passing it. And then you've got to resit and resit and resit to get on to do a course that bears no relation to how well you could do at GCSE English anyway, because the skills are totally different. So we're holding back generations of kids because they've got to have achieved a 4 in a subject that's not really fit for purpose to then get onto the stage to do something that they don't. I mean, the most extreme example I had, one of my friends, her daughter was amazing at drama, couldn't pass maths, couldn't pass it. But the English drama schools wouldn't accept her without her maths. So she went to New York. New York, Americans don't care if you can do maths if you're brilliant at drama. She got in the New York Drama School, but they wouldn't accept her in the English ones because she didn't have GCSE maths. I mean, it's just like insane how many kids get held back over this kind of arbitrary kind of decision and rules like this. So that's something I think needs to be either take out that need to resit, or we need to have a massive rethink about how education is organized, because it actively excludes so many students. So if we empowered them at 16, maybe they wouldn't need their support extra. And later, if we had a curriculum that was fit for purpose, we wouldn't have so many school refusers. There's a huge issue, especially since COVID. Lots of kids haven't gone back. And we've got a whole regime in schools where, I mean, anecdotally, a lot of them are compared to prisons where not allowed to speak in the corridors. I saw somewhere recently where one MAT has made sure that people are never with their friends. So the kids are never with their friends in classes. I mean, it's almost like Dickensian cruelty, really. So they should be allowed to enjoy themselves. And the other side to all of this is, if you think about artificial intelligence, how many opportunities are we losing to kind of level the playing field with kids who have got special needs, because the exams don't really accommodate the idea of artificial intelligence, and the fact that, if you write an email, the suggestion for how to finish the sentence or spell it comes up here. We've got spell checkers, we've got word counts. What are they learning by just writing in 2 hours, comparing a 19th and a 20th century text and with inference? I mean, how does that relate to what they need to do in the real world? So I think there's a huge rethink needed to be about that. Similar for finance and maths. So they've made the maths GCSE for the higher almost impossible. So I mean, there was something like, to get a 4, I think, was something like a 20% pass rate. So how's that empowering anyone where you kind of know you're just about scraping by to pass it? And what are they teaching, to the point where most of the kids are excluded from what it's supposed to be a general certificate that most kids can access. And for artificial intelligence now, for finance, I've done quite a lot of work with accountancy firms and employability. And what they're saying is, really, the technology's there for things like the finance, for the adding up, and the spreadsheets are there, for the formulas are there. What you really need is really good communication skills, because it's all client based and about developing relationships, and the amount of different jobs that are available within an accountancy firm. It's not just, it's marketing, it's HR, it's some of it's psychology and well-being support. There's all kinds of different things there. So you know, again, how many kids are we excluding from the workplace or from particular professional jobs by this really archaic and old-fashioned approach to maths, and whether someone is good at maths or not, and are we sending kids down a particular route with maths and science who maybe we need to work on their communication skills a little bit more and not just, isolate them into or pigeonhole them into doing one particular area. Um, I mean, I tutored a kid recently it was a couple of years ago, and he was getting like eights and nines in maths, but a two in English, and he ended up with two sixes in English. He did really well. But I said to him, I said, look, what's the point getting working on your maths, getting a nine in maths, but getting a two in your English? Because you're not going to be able to get anywhere with that. So, like redressing that balance a little bit. And I'm not even saying that's the right thing to do, but for him to get where he needed to go, it was no good. If he didn't pass his English, doesn't matter how good he was at his maths, he was never going to get anywhere with it. So there's all kinds of issues where I think the whole education system and how we approach it, we've got kids who are on the Xboxes with these amazing graphics and then they're sitting in school and they're sitting just PowerPoint after PowerPoint after PowerPoint and things like you don't get PE, GCSE, something like 75% in the classroom, 25% sport. Science, very rarely do you do any experiments. So it's like the really memorable things are gone. And but the delivery and how it's taught probably hasn't changed enough as far as I'm concerned to accommodate all this brilliant technology that we've got, and it's kind of just been sidelined to and I think there's this fallacy as well that they're told that, well, this will prepare you for work. Does it prepare you for work? Like even wearing the uniforms. I mean, most workplaces now are much like people don't wear suits and ties. And I mean, the girls wearing ties and blazers. I mean, there's a kind of a push for that fashion to come back in. But on the whole, any women wear ties and blazers in the real world? Even the haircuts and the tattoos and all those kind of things are much more visible in certain arenas, but they're told that they have to look in at, this almost like a 1950s version of themselves. So anyway, whole raft of issues there in education. How do we engage kids in education? How can we use artificial intelligence to persuade schools that the certain skills that students do need that aren't being accommodated because there's this focus on a very old-fashioned, out-of-date approach to education and what the kids need to learn. So I think 100. I'll look on Twitter. I try not to get. I never respond on Twitter actually, but I do look at it, and there's a lot of educationists on there, and their big focus is how do we measure ability and qualifications and we want to exclude artificial intelligence. So to make actively exclude artificial intelligence to make sure that but what are we assessing then? What are we doing if those that support's there to include people so that they could use that? Why are we actively in education trying to exclude it when it exists? So is there not a way of accommodating artificial intelligence and still measuring kind of whether someone's good at something or not? And shouldn't we be embracing that to empower and include people rather than persist in this kind of very old-fashioned way of measuring intelligence and actively excluding so many students and actually and if you look at the huge influx or increase in mental health issues, what we're doing to this generation of kids where they feel so disengaged from what they're doing, that it's actually impacting on their mental health. And surely artificial intelligence and all the technology that we've got out there and got access to, should we not be embracing that and thinking about ways of accommodating these needs rather than thinking of ways to actually 100% exclude it so that we can measure some bizarre old-fashioned notion of what being clever is? Anyway, something to think. I haven't got huge answers here, but I do think we need to have to change. So for example, artificial intelligence. I had a kid who he was working at a local housing association. He was really, really good at his job. He wasn't very good at writing reports. So and they said we can't keep him unless he improves in how. So I did a lot of work with him on how to write a housing report. Surely there's an artificial structure that could be in place of how to write a report. And his literacy was pretty much decent, that he could have worked within that. So so anything like that, if we provide a particular structure and then all you've got to do is write within it, why do we need why are we still in a world where same with essays and dissertations, there's certain structures that you're expected and you're judged on whether you can structure something or not. Why don't we kind of use artificial intelligence to create the structure and then measure how interesting what someone says is, as opposed to the structure? I mean, again, another example of that, one of my friends was a mature student and she said, Christine, I keep getting 48%. She didn't matter what she did, she was getting 48% in her essays. So I literally spent probably an afternoon, showed her how to structure an essay. And after that, she never got below 68. And that was it. And I recognize it's a skill in itself, but some people haven't got those people like me coming along and just saying, oh, look, this is how you do it. And they're not getting that support either. They're not getting that support because they're just not. So I think seems like blogs and articles, all those kind of things. There's so many easy ways we can create a structure with artificial intelligence, and then people can just work within it. And I just don't understand why there's still this expectation of measuring intelligence is how well you can create a structure for something, when we could do that, or someone could do that, and then you work within it. And then a report in itself, especially in the workplace, could be is much more nuanced and much more about what is the information that's within it, not the structure of it. So anyway, there's one suggestion. What we do for a big thing that we've been doing as a project is digital inclusion. So for digital inclusion, I mean, 100% recognize, and it's interesting. We did a youth survey, and a lot of the students don't like online banking, and there's certain situations where they would prefer face to face. So I'm not saying I don't think we should eradicate face to face, because I think there is a purpose behind that. But then the reality is we're also, a lot of things are online now. So we've done this big thing helping older people get online. So creating emails for them, showing them different apps, showing them online banking, because the reality is the banks have shut. There is no high street banking really in our town, or any town really. So all of those things. So do we not need a bigger rollout of this kind of thing, that rather than just saying, right, everything's online now, people need to understand the process of it and some support in that. And I think our little project, if you see how many older people have come along, even using Photoshop, actually, one of them said, look, I've got these amazing photos, but I don't know how to use Photoshop, teaching them how to do it. And similar principle, where all this brilliant artificial intelligence stuff is out there, people want to use it, but could we not be better at training them up and including them by training them to use it, not to do it for them? Similar kind of principle, what I've said all the way along. And that's it for me, really. I think ultimately, we need to embrace digital change, and that needs to be for young people, for old people in the workplace. And we need to stop seeing artificial intelligence, because I mean, from the time of teaching Frankenstein, it's that, the principle, and if you think of Aldous Huxley novels, all those kind of things, that there's been a whole decades and decades of like robots going to take over, and we're going to the human race is going to be eradicated, and we shouldn't be, like with Frankenstein, interfering with God's decisions. It's not, as humans. So there's all kinds of kind of philosophical ish, talking points that we can think about. But I think the reality for me is, what can we do really to persuade education and persuade the workplace, and that empowering people and using artificial intelligence to empower people is to give them the opportunities to be able to function as individuals in the workplace, not for other people to make those decisions for them. And how can we use artificial intelligence to do that? then it isn't about everyone else accommodating a particular need, because there's going to get to a point where it's just not realistic. We can't do that. We've got to think about how can we make the world a better place? How can we improve mental health? How can we include people in society? How can we make artificial intelligence a means of improving their lives and their life skills, and including them, and instead of it being in isolation, how do we make it more sociable and more interactive, and use AI to kind of empower people in their lives? And that's it from me. I hope I haven't repeated myself too much, but that is the essence of what I've got to say. And I'm more than happy to take some questions. So I'd look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you very much.